The announcement of Monster Hunter World's expansion, Ascendance, has brought with it a throng of speculation, particularly around the new core map. The Skybound Eyrie, a cluster of Wyverian ruins located in the clouds, presumably above the Eastlands. As I and others have already discussed, an eyrie is specifically the nest of a bird of prey, usually an eagle, but via symbolism, it can also refer to any kind of building or edifice that sits high up and generally out of reach. This has led to speculation about the apex monster of the zone and possible flagship of the expansion, having bird-like qualities and tying into the Kunafan legend of the protective bird Somult. However, it turns out the Skybound Eyrie is not the only name this cluster of floating islands has. While this is the official English localization, and thus all speculation based on the name is valid, Capcom does have an in-house translation team after all, in the original Japanese, the map is not called an eyrie, at least not directly. Rather, it is named the Komoi no Isekigun, the archaeological site in the clouds. Hello everyone, this is Lorei, your friendly neighborhood gaming academic, and in this video we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into the names of Ascendance's signature map, and how these connect to some overall themes of Wilds, but also of the franchise as a whole. Please like, subscribe, and buckle up. The name Komoi no Isekigun, taken very literally, simply refers to a group of ruins in the sky. This wouldn't stand out particularly in a franchise with maps called the Verdant Hills or the Tower, but it does stand out a bit in Wilds, and it turns out that there's a bit more to these terms than initially meets the eye. In Japanese, Isekigun is a term used for a designated group of ruins, or more specifically, an archaeological site. It is the term used for numerous ruins and heritage sites in Japan, for example. In this, the term is distinct from a similar term which is ato, which often means ruins in a form analogous to a trace or a scar, something marking the landscape with its derelict presence. This is the term used for the shrine ruins in Monster Hunter Rise, Taisha Ato, the traces of the Great Shrine, or perhaps more poetically, its scars. Interestingly, this is also the term used for the ruins of Wyveria within the base game of Wilds, which are explicitly referred to as Atokata, traces, vestiges, or evidence. The name of the zone is Ryuto no Atokata, vestiges of the Dragon City. This distinction within the game of Wilds itself highlights two facts to me. Firstly, the Eyrie is a group or cluster of ruins that comprise a designated site, and two, that we are likely sent directly to investigate it, whereas Wyveria is more the evidence that we stumbled upon, as we might a crime scene. The first word, komoi, is also quite nuanced. Read literally, it simply means cloud dwelling. It is an archaic word for sky, reinforcing the sense of the Eyrie's age. But like the term Eyrie, it can be also used symbolically to refer to any high-up place, and by proxy, was often used in classical Japanese literature to refer to the cloud-dwelling-like distance of the imperial court. The emperor was, after all, generally far away. In the names of both the Skybound Eyrie and Komoi no Isekigun, we are given a sense of distance. The location is cloud-dwelling and skybound, a place that, like the residence of the Emperor, was out of the reach of ordinary mortals. It is also a place of great age. Although Eyrie is used to refer specifically to the nests of predatory birds, its more symbolic usage to refer to any out-of-reach edifice has, like komoi in Japanese, a somewhat archaic quality. It is the kind of word one might expect to read in Gothic fiction, for example. The roost of a decadent noble just as predatory as the birds who share his home's appellation. And in this light, perhaps we might ask which emperor held court in this Skybound Eyrie. But it is also a ruin, and not simply a cluster of nameless bricks lying fallow in the deserts or jungles of the old world, a scar on an otherwise pristine landscape. It is an archaeological site, a named designated cluster of ruins to be excavated, catalogued, and investigated. That is, after all, what we were sent into the Eastlands to do. But this actually brings me on to a slightly bigger topic that I've wanted to discuss, which is the way that Monster Hunter uses ruins as a scene setting and narrative device. Ruins have a key place in the Monster Hunter franchise. The Shrine Ruins, the Citadel, and the Tower are all monuments to civilizations whose hold over the territories they once controlled has wavered in the face of time and wyvern. But ruins of multiple civilizations, many unnamed, also pepper the maps of older games, and rarely are these ruins the focus of their games' respective plots. Rather, they contribute a core part of the series' vibe. They are a testament to the world's sense of deep time, a mystery not so much to be unraveled, but rather to be steeped in, lingering monuments to unknown or even unknowable pasts, housing horrors that lurk in the fringes of civilization. In our own world, ruins came to occupy a particular space in the cultural imaginary in the wake of the Industrial Revolution. As more and more people moved to the cities during the 18th and 19th centuries, trading agrarian modes of living for wage labour in factories and rural life for cramped tenements, the imagined space between nature and humanity started to grow. Nature was no longer the thing you lived in. Rather, it existed out there, beyond the edges of the urban metropoles and the borders of the imperial powers of the day. It became recontextualized, both as the location of raw material resources that could be extracted and transformed through the industrial processes of empire and nascent capitalism, but also as a refuge of authentic life, shorn of the masks, the artificiality, and the technological trappings of modern life. It was the place of origin, of harmonious and authentic existence, but also of magic, of mythology, and of danger. Nature was something to be conserved, to be celebrated, to be admired, but it was also something to be feared. A growing cultural fascination with ruins emerged in this broader context. In his article, No Ruins, No Ghosts, the anthropologist Paul Manning argues that, quote, "The very dilapidation of ruins, the triumph of nature over culture, engages the imagination to fill in the blanks of fact with fancy, to recreate the ruined buildings in the mind, and to animate deserted places with imagined living inhabitants." End quote. In a world that was becoming increasingly seen as divided between technologized urban life and the natural world outside of the city limits, ruins were haunting. They were a reminder that civilizations had risen and fallen before, that the empires of the day could, and maybe would, ultimately collapse, and be reclaimed and buried beneath root and vine. As spaces that sit unsettlingly across the nature-culture divide, Manning describes ruins as liminal spaces, spaces that stand on the threshold. He calls these uncanny, excessive, and unruly material assemblages of heterogeneous elements of past and present, culture and nature, human and non-human. That is to say, ruins unsettle us, intrigue us, and haunt us. But perhaps more critically, these feelings that ruins evoke often became externalized, leading to stories about how, while the civilizations that gave birth to these ruins may be long dead, their corpses are not wholly uninhabited. Ruins frequently play home to an array of unsettling and dangerous figures. Ghosts, fairies, goblins. That is to say, ruins are home to monsters. The image of the monster-haunted ruin is the one that has been passed down into the modern fantasy genre, and through that to Monster Hunter as a franchise. The franchise, we must remember, began its life as a very traditional fantasy setting, before evolving into the kind of early modern cave punk science fiction one that it has become. And I think that evolution is important here, because while monsters may draw aesthetically on the ghosts and goblins of folklore and myth, as Rise and Sunbreak did, And while elder dragons are wielders of powers that would beg a belief among our own scientific establishment, the monsters of Monster Hunter are, first and foremost, animals. They do not haunt ruins. They live in them, sleep in them, breed in them. People who stray too close are not spirited away. They are simply eaten. In one of Alma's tea time discussions, yes, the ones that cost actual money, thank you Capcom, she points out to you that the walls of the Ice Shard Cliffs are coated in monster parts. This is not something unique to Wilds. In the older games, using a pickaxe on the walls of the tower could also give you Kushala Daora parts. The ruins of this world do not simply house monsters, they are built from them. Monsters are a foundation of these worlds and their technologies. In the distant past, to be sure, but also today. We see this manifested most clearly in the gameplay loop itself, in the hunting and carving of monsters to generate the raw materials to forge arms and armor. The physical structure of these ruins here creates a sense of continuity with the past, of material usage in human culture. In this way, the builders of structures like the tower and the cliffs have more in common with people like Gemma and the other smithies of the guild than we might be inclined to at first admit. Both groups forge monster parts into the artifacts and edifices of life and survival. The difference is merely one of scale. But it is in this context that I think it is telling that the Skybound Eyrie is not simply a ruin amidst the clouds, etched like a skybound scar. It is an archaeological site. The development of modern archaeology, like the broader cultural fixation on ruins, is also something that occurred in the wake of the Industrial Revolution. This is, perhaps, unsurprising. The same imagination that causes us to fill the absent spaces of the past with fancy also calls us to see what fragments of that past we might painstakingly reconstruct. This approach to ruins, however, is very different from the one taken by romantic travellers who might interpret a crumbling shack as an emblem of some pre-industrial past or the haunt of some boggart. It has a demythologizing element. It demystifies. The excavation of fancy into fact and legend into history is part of the legacy of archaeological discovery in the modern era. We see this perhaps most viscerally in the story of one of the godfathers of archaeology, a man named Heinrich Schliemann. This is him, dapper-looking chap. Born in 1822, he is famous for two things. One, for being, by modern standards, an incredibly bad archaeologist, and two, for discovering the site of Troy, the city that plays host to the Trojan War in Greek mythology, and more specifically in Homer's Iliad, and also, by virtue of the first point, likely destroying it, but we'll cut the guy a sliver of slack for now, simply for the purposes of this video essay. Like our own handler Alma, Schliemann was something of an archaeologist too, although he maybe took his work with a bit less care. Schliemann had a reputation for slow, methodical and technical work that was roughly on par with your local Devil Joe. His heart was in the right place, but his excavation methods meant that was about the only thing he left in one. Where Schliemann stood out, however, was that he was a big believer in the historicity of events that many of his peers considered mythic. Here, the Trojan War. The idea that myths and legends had some basis in fact, and that aspects of those legends could be used to potentially locate historical sites, was not a widespread idea in Schliemann's day, and archaeology in the period became a discipline where understandings of humanity's past were radically transformed, with sites both legendary and even unimagined being brought to light in the Western Academy for the first time. These archaeological sites were instrumental in revealing how ideas flowed from one civilization to the next, and how narratives were transmitted, passed down, and transformed from one group to the next. Critically, of course, and this does have to be said, the ruins that pointed to these realities did not appear suddenly in the mid-1800s. They had been there, in many cases, for thousands of years. Nor were their histories completely unknown. Often local knowledges and indigenous customs had long borne understandings of many of their local sites, The teasing out of historicity from myth and of fact from fancy is actually something that crops up within the Monster Hunter franchise quite often, and specifically within the context of monsters themselves, particularly Elder Dragons or Elder Dragon equivalents. As Oceans has discussed in his numerous fantastic documentary videos, a few of which I've linked in the description, the abilities and existence of elders like Kushala Daora, Camillios, or the god wyverns Ukanlos and Akantor were frequently the topic of local folklore and regional mythologies, long before the animals were confirmed to exist by the guild. Although it remains to be seen whether Somult is going to be elevated from the realms of folklore to join this already prestigious cast of endgame threats. One more interesting example within the context of base worlds actually relates to Wyveria itself. The first place that Wyveria is mentioned, not by Kunafa or Azuz, but rather by the people who we are most likely on an initial playthrough to overlook, the Woodwards. To the Woodwards of the Scarlet Forest, the name of long-dead Wyveria has become, through time and linguistic drift, perhaps a word for a general city or a settlement.
Ha-ha! Grovel and feel humblings, for this is our great Wyvir. Wyvir, our city. I mean, this forest belongs to us Woodwards. Mind your P's and Q's.
In hindsight, this interaction tells us a lot. It tells us both that the name of Wyveria has been passed down, as one language segues into another, to perhaps become a more generalist noun. But Plum Peach is also, of course, telling the player something much more direct. This place, these ruins reclaimed by nature in which you are currently standing, are Wyveria. Dwelling in the retaken remnants of the city, the Woodwards play with that more romantic notion of ruins as inhabited by fairies and goblins. Like those figures, they spirit away your belongings, lead you on merry chases, contract you into unwelcome tasks for assistance, and consistently get you into trouble. But much like the larger monsters with whom they share these ruins, there is nothing supernatural about the Woodwards. They are simply a tribe of curious Lineans who hunt, trade, sleep, and hold feasts beneath the night sky. Language and legend here act as pointers towards history, leading us, in hindsight, to reframe the crumbling ruins of the Scarlet Forest not simply as the overgrown traces of past glories, but as a site for studying the reach and continuities of a civilization, of Wyveria. Ruins provoke the imagination, leading us to conjure past denizens and present horrors, but they can also provoke inquiry, pushing us to look through the stories we have been told and to rediscover aspects of our past and what we have forgotten. Like our own world, the world of Monster Hunter is rife with ruins and legends. But also like ours, it is a world of discovery, of scientific inquiry, of cataloguing and classification. The spirits that haunt its ruins are just animals, albeit fantastical ones, with delineated categorizable physiology no matter how outlandish a frost sack or a monkey with muscles as dense as gold might be in our own world. In this light, I think to name the Skybound Eyrie explicitly, at least in the Japanese, an archaeological site, not simply a ruin, an isekigun, not an ato, is to call to attention that aspect of its world building that makes Monster Hunter unique. It is a world of wonder and mystery, to be sure, but also one that can, with painstaking effort, care, and a sword the size of a bulldozer, come to be understood. Among all the games in the franchise, Wilds has been perhaps at the forefront of capitalizing on this specific uniqueness. It is the game, after all, that arguably finally gave us the truth behind the legend of the Equal Dragon weapon, originally published in Hunter's Encyclopedia 1. The story of the Equal Dragon weapon, as hinted at in that early franchise text, was a story of a war, of a civilization's hubris, and of a chimerical monster sutured together from its peers, looking out across the Eastlands from atop cliffs made of monsters. This story becomes reframed as the shadowed fragmentary recollection of Zoshia's creation and of Wyveria's collapse. I think going forward, it is important to state here that the truth behind this legend was no less horrifying or mysterious for finally becoming known. A rainbow does not necessarily become less beautiful when one understands how it is formed. This, of course, begs the question of what legends we may be chasing in Ascendance. The most likely and the most prominent, in my opinion, is the legend of Somult, the legendary guardian bird from Kunafan stories. Zato tells us that the story of Somult is the story of a great bird that healed the stark rift between the land and its people, one whose name means the binding force. It is among a cluster of stories, ones from ancient times, that is often told to the children of Kunafa by Elder Ella, likely the reason that Nona associates the hunter from Avis unit with the bird upon your first meeting. The Elder offers to tell you the legend in-game, although, apparently, our hunter is not interested. I think this might be what they mean when they refer to ludonarrative dissonance in games. The two most common interpretations of Somult from the base game is that the legendary bird refers both to the player character and to Zoshia. The symbolism in the first instance is quite apparent. We are the hunter from Avis unit, that is, the bird unit. Nona calls us Somult when we first rescue her. The player character here is Somult via analogy and coincidence. We operate like the Great Bird as a protective force over the communities of the Eastlands. The way that this plays out reminds me of the not historically accurate idea that the Mexica or Aztecs mistook the conquistador Hernan Cortés for their god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. This, it has to be stated, is not true. While the idea was forwarded by Cortés decades after the conquest of Mexico, most modern historians consider it a post hoc fabrication used retroactively by the Spanish to justify the conquest itself. I bring it up here though because the myth itself is quite widespread in popular culture, and we potentially see its wider influence in the framing here of the hunter. That is, a foreigner who arrives on a ship from the unknown west, mistaken as the embodiment of a protective feathered deity. If Somult is in the expansion and somehow turns out to be a feathered snake wyvern like Elder Dragon, I think we can safely say this myth had its impact. The other primary base game association with Somult is, of course, the final boss, Zoshia itself. I've touched on this in several recent videos, and it's also the subject of a fantastic Reddit post that I have linked in the description. To go over the core points here, Zoshia was created by Wyveria as the ultimate guardian, as the protector and saviour of their civilization. In terms of its core physiology, several parts of Zoshia, the non-fatalis parts, are bird-like, with feathery wings of Wilk and a bird-like skull hidden under its shell. It is explicitly angelic, the white seraph dragon to use its formal title. And on this note, while seraphim are angels, their name, which means burning one, is also used in Hebrew to refer to snakes. Its armor and weapons carry this angelic avian motif, and its palico weapon is, quite simply, a bird, likely a reference to traditional depictions of the Christian Holy Spirit in the form of a dove. Both of these readings of Somult are valid and likely intentional. They create, within the base story of Wilds, a dyad, a symbolic pairing of saviour figures, one false and one true, one born within Wyveria, and another who comes from afar, one who, as the Hunters Guild does in lore, safeguards the ecosystem while the other parasitically leeches upon the foundation of all life in the Forbidden Lands. The conflict between these two Somults, the Avis Hunter and the White Seraph Dragon, forms the climax of the base game's narrative. There is, of course, a third reading that will potentially, in hindsight, be equally as valid, which is that Somult, the real, original Somult, is going to be either the flagship or the final boss of Ascendance itself. Somult here is imagined as a bird-like or bird-snake-like elder dragon or demi-elder, the base template of which became Zoshia, and who now makes the Eyrie its home. To this, in the interest of playing with fact and fancy, I want to add another potential reading that ties into the topics that I've been discussing here today. What if Somult does not live in the Eyrie? What if Somult is the Eyrie? Sit with me here. The two core things we learn about Somult are from Zato: its role in the old stories and the meaning of its name. It is the binding force, which healed the rift between the land and the people. If we look at the rendition of the logo present in the ruins of Wyveria, the icon that is representative of the Eyrie is seemingly this section, a crystal interlaced with infinity radiating light upon the world. This icon is absent from the base game logo and present in Ascendance. However, in the version that exists in-universe, it sits at the summit of the land spine, binding the ascending and descending halves together. The Skybound Eyrie is, potentially, in other words, a binding force, one located, like a great bird, high above the world. The other part requires a slightly bigger leap, but is, at least to me, more interesting. We see in the trailer both the desert portions of the Eyrie, and also in the distance some of the artificial trees present in the forest. This has led me to suggest that the Eyrie may in fact be our multi-biome map, our version of Iceborne's Guiding Lands or Sunbreak Citadel. If this is the case, I believe that we will discover that the Eyrie is the location where the inclemencies of the Eastlands were first prototyped, tested, and refined before being rolled out across the world below. That is, where Wyveria's mastery of the natural world in service of its city first came to be. The concept of healing a great rift between the land and its people is often used to represent a harmony rewrought between humanity and nature. However, the nature of the wilds in Monster Hunter Wilds is grounded on artifice. The people of Azuz point this out directly after you reveal the workings of the Everforge to them, commenting that it is very difficult for them to understand that everything that they took to be natural was in fact far from it. It would be, I think, interesting if it turned out that the Great Rift that Somult was said to heal was actually itself the creation of the cycles of inclemency, plenty, and fallow, a cycle prototyped and pioneered high above the world, in an area as distant as the Imperial Court. Myths often contain fragments of truth, after all, but they are not always the truths we expect. This does not, of course, prevent Somult from also being a monster that calls the Eyrie its home, much as it would not prevent it from being both the Avis Unit Hunter and Xochia. To continue the ambiguous applications of the identity of Somult as both a monster and a place in this context would simply reinforce a thread already present in the base campaign. The power of stories is that they can often refer to multiple different things, have different historical roots that have gradually become intertwined, and have different contemporary applications. However, as we look towards that looming Eyrie in the sky, one that in the art of old Wyveria binds the two halves of the land spine and radiates light upon the world, it is perhaps time to start thinking about which parts of the stories Elder Ella tells of Somult, like the verses of Homer's Iliad, hold a kernel of historical truth that is waiting to be finally unearthed. And I, for one, cannot wait to begin to dig up the sky. This was maybe a bit more experimental of a piece. I wanted to try weaving some expansion speculation with a bit of my own academic background and some educational elements, although thinking about Schliemann again was a bit of a deep cut from studying classical civilizations in my high school days, which are a long time ago. I've wanted to touch a bit on the use of ruins in the franchise for a while, and finding out the name of the new location in Japanese was a perfect moment to do so. My Japanese was also a bit rusty, as it's been quite a few years since I really used it, so that was fun to excavate a bit as well. This video also acts as a bit of a prelude for another piece on Wilds and the nature-culture divide that I'm going to do probably in a few weeks, so I hope you all stick around for that. If this got any thoughts racing, please like and leave a comment, and if you want to see more of my content, consider subscribing. Otherwise, take care, and love and solidarity to you all. This has been Ray, signing off.
Did I go and burst the bubble? Promise more than I can give. I tried to touch its cosmic sheen, but today all I smell is chlorine. Yesterday I was deep sea diving, but today I found a floor. find a door.